Welcome to episode 6 of the On TRAC podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan, and this episode, the OriginTrail founders and I are back together again to unpack everything related to the protocol's upcoming V8 update. Now, we're not literally all together like we were last episode. Everyone is virtual and remote, but it was fun to have the crew back since it's been a while since I've had the opportunity to speak with all three founders at the same time. On TRAC is, of course, the show where we bring you all the latest and juiciest developments from the OriginTrail ecosystem and the verifiable internet for artificial intelligence that the OriginTrail technology is crucially enabling. V8 represents a massive shift in scalability and capability from the existing V6, and I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that my mind was blown while recording this episode, as Branimir demonstrated live some of the project's upcoming new features. I won't spoil it for you, but let's just say that this episode had me on the edge of my seat. All in all, as the team says, V8 will make it possible to use AI privately and seamlessly by anyone on any device and on any chain. And to find out how this is all made possible, all you have to do is keep listening. So let's get right into it. Here is episode 6 of the On TRAC podcast, recorded live. Yeah, our last episode was just about 2 months ago at this point. And we saw Branimir. We haven't seen Tomasz and Giga for a while, at least a couple of months, or at least 3 months. How's everyone doing? What are some of the things that you guys have been up to, I guess, since we last spoke 2 months ago?
Hi, it's good to see you. I hope you missed us.
See you too. I weep every night that I don't see you.
That's the correct response. Yeah, it's nice to be back, and definitely a good episode to come back on with all the cool stuff that we'll be covering. So yeah, I guess I'll just say hi at the minute. Let Giga say hi too.
I was hoping you were gonna say more. Otherwise, I'll make a brief introduction. So, expanding on the hi, it's been a while, and it's been a lot of things that we've been dealing with in the past couple of months. You've all heard it from Branimir from New York and Professor Dr. Metcalf and Amos and Jonathan. I was envious listening to you guys hanging out in New York. This time around, we're a little bit more decentralized, and this time the topic is a little bit more hands-on. I remember Bob Metcalf talking about how cool would it be if we would demonstrate a few things a little bit more than we usually do. So we decided to this time bring in some fresh demos about the topic that the community is most interested in, which is the version 8 of the DKG, which has been a long-awaited version, which is slowly coming to a fruition. So we have an updated roadmap, which is based on some very encouraging results that we're getting from the demo of the node, of the new type of a node that we're launching within the V8. It's really cool, not only because we're improving scalability, but also because it is encompassing, it has a capacity to encompass much more knowledge, much more data than the previous, any of the previous versions. What we're going to demonstrate is a live demo showing 100x improvement in scalability. Also, a vastly more improved, let's say, value proposition when it comes to private data, which is very important in the day and age of AI, like Jonathan mentioned. Already on V6, we have introduced a very powerful way of making AI more accurate, less bias prone, using decentralized RAG, which builds upon what Meta a few years ago coined the term RAG, which stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. And OriginTrail is the first one that is vastly extending the capabilities of the RAG, or the decentralized Retrieval Augmented Generation, which comes very handy when it comes to private and sensitive data. So besides immense scalability improvements that we're going to show with the most recent software development that's coming out of our studio, we're also going to show how more vastly powerful and capable this technology is in delivering more value to its users. And that's very important because the usage has been growing increasingly in the past few months, and the users are demanding more scalability, more use cases. So it's a very called for update that we're going to cover in this podcast. At the end of the podcast, we're also going to release a report detailing the results so far, the update on the V8, all the scalability, all the new value props that are being underpinned by the V8. and finally also the roadmap. So that will be a little bit more of an all-arounder high from my end. We've been busy and we're bracing ourselves for an even busier summer.
Yeah, I mean, that all sounds very exciting. And I'm super looking forward to exploring this demonstration that you have in store, I guess. Anything you wanted to add, Branimir?
Yeah, it's going to be an exciting episode, and super happy to see you again. And yeah, really interesting to see how V8 is coming up. So I'll be sharing that demo today. So you're going to see something really, really cool. But yeah, shout out to everybody joining. I see a bunch of comments. Amos is very vocal. Hello, Trinizone. Hello, BRX. Hello, Blobzor. Andrew, all of you guys, welcome to the podcast. And yeah, feel free to shoot.
Yeah, I should add that we did collect several questions. We got a last minute kind of spree of questions come in yesterday. So thank you all for all those questions. If we don't get to the questions in the presentation or the conversation itself, we will save a few minutes at the end to make sure that we answer as many of those questions as we are able to get to. So before we get into sort of the specifications, the technicalities, the deep dive into V8, these new features and this demonstration, I want to have a bit of a more broad and general conversation first. So sort of the tagline of this episode and of V8 is that these upgrades will make it possible to use AI privately and seamlessly in a user-friendly way by anyone on any device and on any chain. Now, there's a lot, just in that statement alone, there's a lot to break down in there. And we're going to get to those specifications as we go along in the episode. But I guess just to start more broadly, is it not possible now to use AI privately, seamlessly, in a user-friendly way on any device, on any chain? Like, it sounds like there's a problem here that V8 is addressing. So what is that problem exactly?
Yeah, I can take the first step. Because of the novelty of the technology as well, or at least the maturity stage that artificial intelligence has reached recently, we are in a position where there's multiple paths that we can take, almost as a society, if you will. And these challenges of how to use AI safely and how to use it in a way that we can preserve our privacy and that we can have solutions which are explainable so that we have a way of grasping really how certain outputs have been created, and as well at the same time be predictable for the side of those who are launching it, so that they know that actually what some solution is going to output isn't something random, right? That they could be accountable for. And it's really a top level question that, for example, we were also discussing just recently within the scope of a sandbox that OriginTrail has been accepted into, where we're discussing this on a really high level with how does this also impact, for example, the regulations. And when you're looking at it from a societal perspective, one thing is pretty clear is that OriginTrail has set towards the right path from the get-go in seeing how really the decentralized knowledge graph can hugely impact the AI's scope of solutions that can be created, and vice versa, how AI can really be leveraged so that not only the DKG, but really the Web3 as an industry can have a clear path towards the mainstream. However, we also saw that there's future advancements that can be made that can really propel and can really maybe even position the current understanding of what you can do with the DKG and make it seem very small in comparison to what you could do if these advancements would be possible. And that's definitely very much towards that sentence that you were saying. So any user, any device, any chain, it's how do we break those barriers and make it as seamless, as user-friendly as it can be, so that you can use both AI and the DKG in a way that is seamless, that it's fun and easy to use, but that it also can create a lot of values. And this value can be for yourself as an individual, and equally so as for an organization or even for government bodies. This type of data or sensitive data that we're looking at, that this can be empowered by, can be found across the board. Yeah, that's why I feel that it's a really groundbreaking, in a way, approach of what we're going to see today, just in terms of how much more things are becoming possible and really kind of living up to that any user, any device, or any chain.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess one sort of follow-up question from that is that another thing, just from the description of this episode, that I found interesting was this quote that the enormous amount of untapped private data is clearly the next frontier for AI growth. Can one of you unpack exactly what this means? So does this mean that AI cannot use private data now, is unable to, or is it an ethical issue? Why is this the next frontier for AI growth? And then I guess how exactly does OriginTrail allow users to keep their data private but still be used for these AI solutions?
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic to go into. There are several aspects to it, but let's say we can start from very basic ones. Like you can see today that things like ChatGPT know quite a lot about the world, but like pretty much all of what they know comes from all of the public data that it was able to learn on, right? So it was trained on basically the public internet. And essentially, that also means that if you ask it about something that it doesn't know, like something that's like, let's say, your company, so data that's within your enterprise systems was not available to ChatGPT, so you cannot ask it things like that. That's why there's a lot of interest in what Giga mentioned at the beginning, which is the retrieval augmented generation, where you basically feed that data into an LLM. And we are witnesses of how quickly these LLMs have grown because basically they've been trained on more data. So they've been fed more things. GPT-2 could do quite a bit, but then GPT-3 could do many, many more things, and all of the versions coming after that. And basically it all happens because they trained it with more stuff, right? And eventually the public stuff runs out. So pretty much, Google has crawled out the whole internet and is doing it constantly, so we can use search and other things. But not just Google, everybody is like basically depleting this public resource, even though data is being constantly produced at a higher rate. So there's an exponential growth all over. But effectively, there's more private data that's not available on the web than there is the public data. Just think about any device you have, or think about any company that obviously doesn't put out all of its sensitive information on the web. This data is extremely valuable. The proof that it's valuable comes from many different places, but just most recently, you could have seen, for example, Apple and OpenAI making kind of a deal where Apple devices can use ChatGPT without any payments. So we will be able to basically do it. How? Well, basically because there will be a data flow going towards the ChatGPT, and therefore actually getting into an ethical issue, as you mentioned, of how that data might be used. But ultimately speaking, the value of that data, the value of this private data on devices is so high that all of the costs are basically non-important. OpenAI is not going to charge Apple for it at all. That's not just the only example. There was another example recently that was very controversial with Microsoft taking screenshots of, basically your screen and storing it in a very, let's say, not so privacy preserving way, I would say, because basically it was such a basic unencrypted storage system that anybody who could get access to your computer could basically access all of this information because it was just like sitting there in a folder. But the point here is not like so much on the detail side of things. It's more on the approach and the actual value generating activity. These big companies like Microsoft, OpenAI, and others wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't valuable. And that basically means that they depleted the public resources, the public data. So really the new frontier is the private data. And we've been speaking about this for a while, even with our partners in one of the previous sessions, where basically it's been obvious that whatever could have been scraped on the public web is being scraped already all the time. So all of these competitors, they're looking for, something to give them that edge. And at the same time, this is really the proof that knowledge, data, is a new type of asset class. So when we come to using private data with AI, we really need to make sure that we as users, we as humans even, have this capability of controlling how it's being used, that we actually have ownership over it. And a really good way to do it is basically to have control of the system. That means you have open source software that you can see and audit. OriginTrail is being built as an open source system from the get-go. So it's also been being built according to privacy preserving principles. So there's been many projects. We worked with several different institutions, particularly in the EU, where this has been pretty much a major requirement. There's even a manifesto about it, and you can find it in the OriginTrail documentation, by the way. All things considered, OriginTrail is really primed to enable usage of knowledge assets in a privacy-preserving manner for anybody. And the idea here is that we can bring it to any device, which we'll go more into very soon. So ultimately, basically protecting our information, but being able to extract the same value that these companies are extracting from our data for many years now. And it's been happening even before AI. So I speak about this quite often, that like the biggest companies like Google, Netflix, Amazon, Uber, all of them have knowledge graphs under the hood. And these knowledge graphs are used to basically generate more value from the data we feed them. For example, IKEA has a knowledge graph that saves all of your preferences and other people's preferences in purchases. So when you're, for example, purchasing a couch, it's going to recommend you to buy a cushion or like a reading lamp that you would put next to a couch because it makes sense, right? It has this information learned in its knowledge graph, actually. And this is a very simple example of knowledge graph reasoning. But ultimately speaking, data is extremely valuable, and private data is like, there's so much of it, and it's been untapped. So they're coming after all of this data. So it's time to be able to take control of it and actually get value out of it in a way where we decide as users and as humans, not artificial
and
beings,
I think we
how
have
it's being
strategically
used.
selected the July 4th to talk about the independence of users from conglomerates that have pretty much all control over our data, and soon after they can impact our behavior as a part of societies. So much like the Boston Tea Party was an initiation towards the independence of America, of the United States, these acts, so bringing in privacy preserving technologies, are kind of a Boston Tea Party all over again. Us bringing in technologies that are built by the community, for the community, maintained by the community, to really achieve a form or a fair level of data independence, which is absolutely needed. I mean, human beings have been striving for independence since forever, and we have gained gradual independence, but it has never been without a fight. And right now it seems that what we're building together with the community within our wider ecosystem essentially is a fight for independence. Now, we're not fighting for the territorial independence or any other similar form of independence, but rather data independence, so that we can freely choose our destiny without being knowingly or unknowingly impacted by bigger entities. And V8 is a solid move towards that direction. And what's even more encouraging is that the scalability tests and the usability that is being brought about by the V8 can really support mainstream adoption, which OriginTrail is all about. If you check our track record, pun intended, OriginTrail is, correct me if I'm wrong, it's like that meme, change my mind if you want to, is the only Web3 ecosystem that actually is onboarding the actual mainstream users, starting of course with enterprises and so on, but that's the actual mainstream usage, which it needs to be somehow underpinned by a scalable, decentralized technology. And already so far, and more so in the future, OriginTrail is becoming the most scalable, the biggest decentralized infrastructure capable of supporting the scale of the data exchange that is needed to support this data independence in the age of AI.
We've just gone over a lot of the more higher level concepts. Speaking of the V8, let's dive right into the V8 itself. So again, the tagline being that V8 makes it more user-friendly, that anybody can upload private knowledge on any chain, on any device, by anybody. So what does the V8 introduce or change exactly? Because right now, I could theoretically, I can go on my laptop, I could mint a knowledge asset that contains some data about myself that has thus far been private. I don't know, my weight or something like that, my height, I guess that's not very private. You can look at me and see how tall I am, but like my health information, whatever. I could go on there, I could mint a knowledge asset myself, and theoretically some new AI developer could come and take that knowledge and make an AI that uses that knowledge that I just minted onto the DKG through the regular web interface. So What exactly does V8 change about this to make this more easy? Does it make you able to upload more information? What's the big deal here?
Branimir, perhaps we dive into the iceberg that nicely depicts the answer, because it's a very good question. And I would really hate if we missed, a few important tenets of what it brings. And we need to really look into what has been available so far versus, the capacity that V8 is bringing, as well as the overall context in which we are right now. And this context is way different than 2022, end of 2022, when V6 launched. So the graphic, and I believe Branimir is already pulling it out, really nicely shows that. Pulling out the iceberg.
Somebody pulled out the iceberg.
That's a small one.
yeah. It's I think you gave the right context. So the V6 has been a really big update, but it's been out since about a year and a half ago when it's been launched, and it's actually brought a lot of new good things. For example, before the version 6, OriginTrail knowledge assets haven't been introduced in the same way. So it was possible, of course, to use the Decentralized Knowledge Graph, but it didn't have the concept of knowledge assets enshrined in the way they are today with the standardized properties, including W3C standards like RDF and Sparkle, which empowered a lot more use cases. We also got more scalability back then, but actually V6 has given us a kind of capability to onboard the projects and the demand that was really obvious at the time, and which was really before there was such a huge demand, even bigger one for AI, because literally when V6 launched, that's exactly when ChatGPT launched and the whole boom happened. So we've seen actually the capacity of V6 hitting its limits. People who've been running nodes or using DKG, we've probably seen that, for example, on different levels. For example, the level of the blockchain, the NeuroWeb blockchain is hitting really highs in terms of being one of the most used chains in Polkadot ecosystem because it has the most amount of transactions, and all of these driven by adoption. But it's also pushing to the limits of how much we can fit into a block. And that's one layer. On another layer, it's how complex, or rather computationally complex, it is to create knowledge assets both on-chain and off-chain. So there's quite a few knowledge assets out there already, but in terms of growth, it's actually hitting several limits on several layers. And each time that this has happened, we basically had a new version come up that found ways to basically push these limits further and tackle these issues. So V6 really, when it comes to what it can bring, and with all of the innovation it brought, is only the tip of the iceberg. Inside of DKG now is not nearly as big as what we will see with V8 and what the scale of demand is for V8. So really with V8, we get this whole iceberg as part of the DKG. And we introduce two new concepts. Essentially, to get this scalability, we introduce the concept of the DKG V8 Edge, which corresponds, of course, connects to the DKG V8 core, which is in a way the evolution of the existing elements in the DKG. The existing nodes of the DKG will turn into core nodes, while we get a completely new type of node, this edge node, which will actually run on any device. So think of laptops, phones, or other devices that basically seamlessly integrate with the DKG core. So the idea behind this concept is, as we discussed, to enable privacy-enabling AI so that you can do this on your device, or the device of your choice, but also in a very easy, user-friendly manner, like you can carry basically the DKG in your pocket, in your phone. But outside of privacy, this brings a lot more new capacity to the network. So with all these new devices, we get more power and we get more capability, and essentially enable all of this to be part of one big decentralized knowledge graph. Data privacy features have been around for a while in the DKG, but not to the extent that we are going to see them with this new approach. So essentially, the DKG V8 is going to have two types of nodes: core nodes, which you can consider very similar to the nodes we have today in version 6. They're more robust, enterprise ready. They would be generally running on like a server somewhere, either on bare metal or some cloud server, while the edge nodes you can consider being ran everywhere, including servers. There's nothing to stop you to run it there, but like think of, for example, running it on your phone and having all your knowledge in your phone, all your knowledge assets on your phone, but with these knowledge assets, not only use them on your phone, use them in connection with the public knowledge in the DKG core, you can also enable access to that knowledge to others. So other people on the network, just like you can send DMs today in some simple chat app, whatever, you're going to be able to exchange knowledge directly between people. And actually, we're going to show you one prototype, a working prototype of the Edge node today in a bit. But essentially, to sum it up, it brings us privacy, brings us scalability, and it brings us really ease of use. Because that's one of the things that we got also a lot of feedback on is how can we get this power to the people, right? On July the 4th. But also just for enterprises, we've had a lot of cases where there were users who were populating the DKG with devices already, and there was a need to make this really much easier and simpler. Effectively, to get this going, we need quite a bit of more capacity. So the scalability that was already hitting basically the limits is something that just necessarily needs to go up. Scalability is quite a big challenge when it comes to decentralized systems, particularly. If you have been following the blockchain world for a bit, I probably don't need to tell you that they're all struggling with scalability, and pretty much a lot of the new ecosystems and projects are trying to tackle exactly that problem. And we've seen some growth over time, but fundamentally it's slow and hard because the problem is of a distributed nature. You have a lot of machines around the world, devices that need to somehow synchronize and communicate, and literally physics becomes a problem because you have to propagate messages throughout the entire planet, basically, which is something centralized systems don't have. So when it comes to growing scale in a decentralized system, it's a really, really tough challenge. And when it comes to OriginTrail, our track record shows that every new release, we managed to bring a significant several order of magnitude increase in scalability from V5 to V6 from like previous versions. But now you can expect that to happen also with version 8. And actually, I'm just going to dive in and show you just a second to start this demo and share my screen, show you an example of an edge node and how much more scalable it is.
You really covered it nicely with the pyramid. The idea is definitely scale, but as you see, the user experience, not from the first screen, but from the screen following, the user experience gets drastically improved.
So you see the prototype DKG V8 node, and with it comes actually an app for, in this case, a laptop. So what I'm actually going to show you is basically how you can use your local node. So this is the log of the node. For those of you who have been running nodes, you might have seen this before, but you haven't seen this node yet though. And this node is basically it operates on my machine. So with this node, for example, I can use a ChatGPT-like interface, basically an AI assistant, and ask a question. In this case, I'm going to ask a definition, let's say here, provide a definition of optimal sleep quality. What's happening now is actually knowledge assets are being fetched from DKG core. And actually, what's under the hood is I'm using a local LLM. So this is the log of a local LLM. No data has left basically the machine in terms of going to like an OpenAI or some other LLM. And actually what I'm getting results from are my node speaking with the LLM. And it returns an answer that says the optimal sleep quality refers to state of restorative, refreshing sleep, and yada, yada, yada. But this basically comes from knowledge assets about sleep. So there's two particularly knowledge assets in this case that are actual papers about sleep and metrics. So this was a general question, and this was something we've seen before as well. But now if I come here into the knowledge assets section, and in this prototype, I'm going to show you how we can basically upload some interesting sleep data. So what is the interesting sleep data? I don't know if you guys can see me, but I have this weird looking black ring on my hand. That's the Oura ring. Maybe some of you know about it. It basically is a sleep tracker. So kind of some people don't wear it during the day. Some people do, like I do, because I'm a nerd. And it measures your basically all of the vitals, heart rate, or more precisely heart variability and things like that, which contribute a lot to sleep. Especially, it's important to wear it while you sleep, obviously. Measures the quality of your sleep. So I'm going to actually upload an export of the data from the ring. And once I do this, as you can see, there's actually what's happening under the hood. It's publishing knowledge, actually, a couple of hundred knowledge assets in this case, 397 to be precise. And it has published them in roughly 10 seconds. So it has created something called a knowledge collection, and it did a batch mint of 397 knowledge assets. And basically now I can use my node and I can chat with that. So for example, I can ask a question, how do I improve my personal sleep? For example, here it is. And same thing happens as before, but it doesn't just fetch knowledge from the public DKG or the DKG core. It's actually fetching it from my node as well. So as you've seen previously, these two knowledge assets, there's this third one, which is my sleep data. And actually now it's going to stream the answer to me, again, using the local LLM. And it's going to tell me how well or poorly I sleep. And it's going to use the data that I just uploaded. So basically, it gives me some areas for improvement where I can, I guess, improve latency, timing. I don't go to bed as early as I should. I know that already. Efficiency, restfulness, things like that. So I slept very poorly on May 5th. And I think that was the time I was in the US with you, Jonathan. So probably jet lag or something. So long story short, what you've seen basically here is that I just created 397 knowledge assets in one transaction through the local node. And this node has all of the information kept privately here on my machine. None of that has left my DKG node, the Edge node. And with this node, now I'm able to interact directly. So think of this, but just running on your phone or any other device that you might be using, enabling you to do many, many more things. Also enabling API access, so it doesn't have to just be basically through a UI and all of these great things like Sparkle endpoints, things like that. So how did we manage to do this? And by the way, why number 397 of knowledge assets in one transaction? I mentioned this batch minting thing, which is essentially equivalent to kind of like batch minting NFTs. You might have seen that improvement previously in the NFT world. Well, essentially, we're able to batch mint many more. So we have been doing some preliminary prototypes and testing, and we managed to squeeze in several thousand knowledge assets in one transaction. Now, obviously, there's some more work to be done, but essentially what we're looking at here is the ability to increase scalability of publishing at least several hundredfold compared to V6. That is one element, as I said, one layer of scalability improvements, which is the version 2 of knowledge assets, bringing batch minting as we've seen it. There's obviously a lot more to come. This is a prototype, but basically you're going to be able to do pretty much just this. You might have seen that it's a little slow to respond. That's because I'm running an LLM on my local machine, and it's actually Mistral that I'm running. So it's not the smallest model in the world, but it was pretty decent, right? So kind of a trade-off of maybe getting a slightly slower answer compared to sending it to OpenAI, which like sucks up all your private data, makes sense. But that doesn't also stop you from like running a more powerful LLM or having more powerful hardware than me in this case. So yeah, this is just one example of it and one layer of scalability improvement that we have with the new DKG nodes. And as mentioned, we have a couple more. So basically, when it comes to scaling up on the level of, not on the level of knowledge creation, but on the level of core nodes doing their function, the node runners will know what I'm speaking about. And the ones who don't, I'll try to make it a little simpler in terms of explanation. Basically, DKG nodes cooperate with blockchain smart contracts on any chain that they're listening to. So basically, the throughput of how many knowledge assets can be created depends on how many we can batch into a transaction. As you've seen, previously it was only one. But also the use of chain, it depends on how, let's say, how much the node is demanding from the chain. So the nodes of the DKG need to consistently and constantly send proofs to the blockchain that are actually holding all of this knowledge the public knowledge in the DKG core, what is to become the DKG core. And for these proofs, they submit certain bits and pieces of information from the graph, basically, allowing the smart contracts to basically confirm that they hold this data and therefore that they can fetch the rewards, or really claim the rewards. So there's no way that you can trick the system and like get tokens even though your node is not hosting something. And so far, these proofs have also been happening on a knowledge asset level. So we're also about to see batched proofs. So that is called actually random sampling. That's another layer of improvements where basically we're going to introduce a new type of proving system. I won't go too much into the details, but basically enabling nodes to send batch proofs and actually send them in a different manner, basically time constant algorithmic manner, which means that with the growth of the number of knowledge assets, we don't get growth in the need of nodes to like basically burden the blockchain. It will stay completely constant and nodes will submit basically periodic transactions to the chain, essentially proving that they're hosting certain portions of the knowledge while the chain is giving them random challenges. So it's kind of like a professor. You know, you go to a university exam or whatever, and you learn from like 10 books, and it's like a huge volume of knowledge that you kind of have to have in your head to pass the exam. The professor won't ask you about all of the things from the books because there's not enough time and it just wouldn't work. So they ask you 5, let's say, random questions. And you kind of need to know a lot, if not everything, to be able to answer as many questions. Now, of course, it's a number of questions that is also important, but long story short, it's a very similar system. So random sampling randomly samples a portion of the knowledge graph and demands nodes prove that they own this. And when they do so, they do that as well in a batched way. The way it seems now, we're also going to have several orders of magnitude improvement here. So we've done a really, really good job in doing research on this topic. And in one of the hopefully future demos in the coming period, you guys are going to be able to see that as well. Because one of the things that's actually coming is that we'll also obviously see a V8 testnet that is going to demonstrate these features. And finally, last but not least, there's lots of improvements we're going to be making on the really on the implementation side of how optimal things are happening on the node. So how well the node schedules its work, things like that, but also on chain level. So we're expanding to multiple blockchains, as you may know, as well as expanding capacity on NeuroWeb. So as we're speaking, we're basically finalizing work of introducing asynchronous backing, which is a custom Polkadot improvement for Polkadot parachains. Basically, NeuroWeb is going to get at least 2x. We expect more. We're still in measurement, so I don't want to claim anything, but at least a 2x improvement and double the speed of blocks. So currently block time is 12 seconds. So that means when you create the knowledge assets or batch of knowledge assets, as you've seen just now, it takes at least 1 block time amount. So just as any blockchain transaction, right? So NeuroWeb, that was 12 seconds before asynchronous backing. With asynchronous backing, it goes down to 6 seconds. So we get speed, but also we get a boost in user experience. It's quite a different story when something happens in 6 rather than 12 seconds. So that's roughly speaking a bundle of layered improvements on the scalability front, and each of the layer brings some X. Now, of course, asynchronous backing, not as much knowledge assets version 2 that you've just seen, but it's still, of course, going to contribute. So the ultimate multiplier is going to be very big. And I'm really personally hoping we get to see some incredible number, but in any ways, even 100x is a very powerful number. We haven't had a chance to do that before. So what you've seen here today is 400 knowledge assets in roughly 10 seconds or 1 block. And we're looking to see at least 10 times more than that in batch minting knowledge assets. So yeah, I've been speaking for a while. You guys want to add something to that?
We just leave you to it. But yeah, just take a short breather. Just a side comment. I've seen the demo and the results of this updates a few times before, but each time I see this, I get increasingly excited because of all of the things that were not possible, since very recently, which are now made possible. Not just, the scalability part, which obviously you've seen, it's breaking down all the walls, not only the walls that were limiting us, but, within the industry, we're vastly improving the scalability of what decentralized systems are capable of. And thus, we are able to, service any user anywhere, on any device, any chain. And we're going to get to it, but the roadmap also includes the launch on at least one of the most popular chains, the Base, so making artificial intelligence based pretty much immediately. So many tiny things for which the impact can very simply be understated are, within this, just the part of the roadmap leading us towards the V8. So we try, to give it justice in this call. Just recently, we had a call with a company that pretty much produces, I believe, top 5 even World Wide Web searches on a daily basis. And things like that really give you motivation to build certain things into the technology that is capable of supporting such a scale for so many users and pretty much in any environment. And what we're essentially doing here is a similar kind of a leapfrog in what we do to what iPhone meant for, when Apple brought the innovation, which essentially was a merger of several technologies, iPod and some other stuff, which all came together into one phone, vastly more capable. And to the similar extent, right now, the DKG node brings together also some enterprise components. Of course, not everything is available at the same time, and also not everything is available to every user. It's also based on the business model and the payment that you're willing to provide or a company is willing to support. But by and large, the ease of use should be here so that you're able to generate knowledge assets, publish knowledge assets, even launch an initial pairnet offering. So bring in a collection of knowledge assets and also monetize that, if you will, and do all of these things, employ the community, and start generating knowledge asset where the users are, on social media platform, on your device, on an assembly line, of course, because the enterprise use cases are very much data heavy. So all of these, I guess, realities had to be taken into consideration when we conceived the V8, and right now going into the final sprint of the deployment. The final sprint, not saying this in crypto terms, meaning few days, but rather like the software development terms, the final stage of delivering technology towards the mainnet deployment. So it's really exciting, and it cannot be overstated how much needed technology like this is, and it's only going to be in the future. And I'm sure since the launch of the V6, which took place January 2023, I believe, a lot of things have changed. And we have been very up to date very quickly to adopt the new realities, even at the V6 stage. And that's perhaps one of the reasons why we can be much, much quicker in deploying the V8, because we've learned a lot, especially within the AI world. We're now pretty much tête-à-tête with the biggest and most well-known companies that are delivering on retrieval augmented generation, and OriginTrail is pretty much delivering on the decentralized retrieval augmented generation, which is far more not just capable, but necessary for people to be using AI in a little bit more inclusive fashion. Branimir has really done it well with the demo and showing what level of scalability the technology is delivering now. And we can also go into the roadmap, which is pretty much covering the Q3 / part of the Q4 up until the launch of the V8. Of course, the blog post and the updates are going to be published later, so you can go into details a little bit more. But I think we can touch upon a little bit as to what is expected to happen within this quarter and then the beginning of the next quarter when the V8 is finally launching.
Just go for it, man. I'm very excited over here. So you guys keep talking and just let me bask in the joy.
I'm just sad I have this microphone and not something cheaper. I'd be mic dropping all the time,
Maybe I can just quickly sum it up with the slide now up. So basically, we're looking at 4 stages of the timeline for the launch of V8. So the first one comes with all the preparatory steps with really infrastructure deployment. And in our case, that's multi-chain infrastructure deployment. So what you've seen already, some of the things are out there. So pairnets as a feature are live on the DKG, and we're expecting to see the first IPOs come out very soon. Actually, today we have deployed base mainnet integration. So the DKG from this moment on operates on NeuroWeb, Gnosis, and Base. And very soon you'll be able to run nodes on Base. So basically, if you're a node runner, you can go and update right away, and you'll be able to stake on nodes on Base. So with this integration, we also not just expand the multi-chain approach, the multi-chain footprint of the DKG, it also paves the way for kind of a shift in the approach where we'll be actually enabling an even more seamless multi-chain experience, not just with Base, but Base being one of the first steps. And that's actually also coming with V8. So it's going to be much easier also for the users using DKG Edge Nodes to not just pick a chain, but also kind of have a lot of the stuff done under the hood for them. But also it's going to be easier to stake, easier to do pretty much most of the things around the blockchain operations you've had to do so far, such as bridging, things like that. We'll go more into that on another occasion because it's a pretty big separate topic. But ultimately, it's part of setting up the infrastructure. So the third point here that you see cross-chain knowledge mining support, it's been in the roadmap for quite some time and it's getting in its final stages right now. So basically this first stage we're already pretty much deep into, if not already at the end. Just to give us some context on cross-chain knowledge mining, basically the idea is that whoever wants to launch a pairnet on any blockchain that's supported by the DKG is able to participate in knowledge mining, so run IPOs basically on NeuroWeb, which is a pretty complex technical thing to do, but we're basically there. So essentially you'll be able to, for example, see IPOs launch on Base now. That Base is integrated and at the same time still obtain rewards in Neuro. So that's the cross-chain knowledge mining support that is part of the stage one. Once we have the infrastructure stuff ready, we can proceed to stage two. So we're going to go into DKG Core testnet launch. So we're going to have DKG Core nodes, V8 nodes, basically launching on testnet. There's a bundle of things coming together with this. So basically what you've seen, knowledge assets version 2, the batch minting, you've seen it in prototype. So you're going to be able to use it on the V8 testnet when it launches. Also, the DKG Core, the nodes will have random sampling enabled, not in its final form, of course. We're going to be testing in the real environment. That's why this stage is really important, that we get the final tweaks out and right so that we can move to stage 3. But before we move to stage 3, as I mentioned already, asynchronous backing is basically just behind the corner. So that's also going to be happening within stage 2, and we're going to see it obviously already on mainnet because DKG V6 is connected to NeuroWeb already, but we're going to be seeing it also in the V8 testnet that's coming out. So get ready to run a testnet node if you're into that kind of stuff. And I know a bunch of people are and were previously. So very soon you'll be able to run the stage 2 core node, basically. Stage 3 brings the edge nodes. So what we've seen here is a prototype. We get out of prototype stage and we get the ability to run them on various different machines. Of course, on testnet still. So we're going to be testing and basically understanding if there's any remaining bottlenecks in the system, any bugs we might find, and really overall testing the UX. So expect in stage 3 that you're going to be able to run an edge node on at least a laptop, but we're looking to also enable some form of early mobile phone capability as well. So as time goes out, there will be more and more device supported, and also knowledge assets V2. So what we've seen with batch minting goes outside of prototype. Basically, we're getting to the stage where it's a release candidate and also introduces native vector support, which is another cool and basically very useful feature for AI builders on top. And then finally, as I mentioned, random sampling, it happens in the prototype basically form in stage 2. In stage 3, it goes to define its final form. And this final form, all of the things integrated together with test on stage 3. Once we see that everything is running the way we expect, stage 4 moves in, where we move into the mainnet upgrade. And the mainnet upgrade is going to be actually different from the previous migration from V5 to V6. You might remember if you're there for that event a year and a half ago, basically V6 was spawned as a new network. And so essentially V5 and V6 networks were there for some time together. V5 is still running, by the way. There's still some activity there, so it hasn't toned down. But here, basically, V6 network will morph into V8. You can consider it as forkless upgrade, basically. There will be no V6 afterwards. V6 will turn into V8. So, and that comes from obviously V6 being well built. So we have the ability to move into a next major version without any sort of major breaking changes. We're just adding layers on top. Of course, there's changes under the hood, but ultimately speaking, what we're looking for is that you can basically update your current node and that it becomes a V8 node. And I'm speaking of core nodes, of course. The target month is October, which is when we are looking to have V8 live on mainnet. So like I said, stage 1, we're very close to the end, and we're already actually working quite a lot on stage 2 because asynchronous backing is already being worked on. And knowledge assets V2, you've actually seen the prototype just now. But of course, it's not yet ready for stage 3, so we still have some work to do. With this, we'll also publish much more information, so you're going to be able to also learn more about it, how does it work, and as well as participate in it. So basically having the testnet live, and you can play and test and build on top already. So yeah, that's briefly the timeline.
A lot of very exciting things here, like I mentioned. We do have several questions from the community, both that have come in during the course of this call and that were submitted in advance. So I do want to be conscious of everyone's time and get to some of those, but I do want to be selfish at the same time. And I do have a couple of my own questions about these edge nodes. And one of them actually is one that we got from a couple of people on YouTube. Let me see if I can pull this up here. So the question is, it costs TRAC to publish knowledge assets on the DKG. Is there going to be some sort of fee structure, payment structure implemented in with the edge nodes? Do you need to link a credit card or like something like that?
You're going to have to use TRAC, that's for sure. That's the the only constant, man. TRAC is the glue, and if you want to publish something to the DKG, that's what's going to take for you to do it. Then, of course, there's the 50 shades of implementation gray that you can play around with, whether that means that you just have that TRAC and you can put it to work and publish those knowledge assets even as much as 400 times 10 at a time, or there's going to be an alternative way for you to do it. But yeah, one way or the other, that's what's going to have to happen. Including, of course, it could be possible to integrate, to your point, like a credit card or something like that, and then have that be the working product for a solution. But yeah, the edge nodes are the same way in that sense as the core nodes. When they publish something to the network, the same model applies. So TRAC is going to be put to work.
Yeah, on both ends. So right now it's tedious somewhat on both ends to stake, to run a node, and on the other hand, also to pay for publishing. So that's why enterprises still require a lot of support. And now with chains that are also supporting more seamless way of staking, we're going to pursue a direction of a little bit more built-in multi-chain direction, or multi-chain by design, whereby your actions on one chain can be somewhat mirrored on other chains. So for instance, if you're staking on one chain, you will be pretty much staking on all the chains where the activity is happening without having to go and do the staking, for instance, on all of the chains at the same time. So this kind of improvement, next to you being able to publish and more seamlessly, of course, pay for the publishing. So for instance, if you go and use, Base Smart Wallet, it is easier to do that, the payments, and for instance, doing the publishing via plugin, browser extension, and then, pay using a smart wallet. Thinking in a way like that is right now becoming much more realistic than it used to be with, a couple of less, I guess, user-friendly chains. And now adding more user-friendly chain also brings in benefits to the existing chains, because ideally we want to cover several chains at the same time via mechanisms such as staking. So it's not that, one chain gains to the relative advantage of the other, but rather bringing in chains that are more user-friendly, where also, of course, you can find more users as a consequence of being more user-friendly. This in turn brings benefits to the existing chains, such as NeuroWeb, which as a consequence also gains usership, because people get to know how OriginTrail functions. They get engaged via, let's say, OriginTrail based. And if they want to do mining or even launch an IPO, that would necessarily entail also operations on the NeuroWeb. It's network effects put in place.
The things that Giga was speaking about around multi-chain kind of native approach, it really puts that thinking of the solar panel kind of example to action. So if you imagine TRAC as being the electricity that you're using to publish knowledge assets, then staking TRAC is the equal of putting a solar panel on your roof or somewhere, and then you producing that electricity for yourself. And now, if you're, of course, not limited by the barriers of chains, so if you can have your activity on one chain be echoed across multiple ones, then this becomes even more optimal. You could then have basically also edge nodes utilizing these types of tactics where stake track actually helps some parts of the network fees to get back because of that stake track, and which can then in turn be used for publishing and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. So one more question I have about the edge nodes. I think this idea, the demonstration that Branimir gave, where the health ring, forget the name of the ring, the Oura ring? Oura ring, okay.
Oura ring, yes.
So you upload your information to it. I guess a quick question would be, will there be a way in the future for this to be done automatically to integrate with like the API from the Oura ring so you don't have to do a manual upload like that? That would be the first question. I guess if you want to just give me a yes or a no.
It can be done, basically. That's a very short answer. It's not just Aura, it's other devices such as, for example, you might have heard of Whoop. It's kind of one of the big brands also in the space. They offer an API access. So, for example, through this API Whoop, you can like create basically a data pipeline that pulls it out every once in a while, let's say every day or every week or whatever you feel like. And when you do that on your node. So your node does that, basically goes and pulls out the data automatically, creates knowledge assets, and it all happens while you sleep, for example. The cool part about this, something we haven't mentioned, is the DKG nodes, both edge nodes and core nodes, which essentially under the hood, sort of their heart is the same. What you've seen also on my screen, like even edge nodes are going to be running most of the same code as the core nodes. They are also going to get additional capabilities in terms of ingesting knowledge or creating knowledge from data. So a lot of the stuff we've been building over the years, especially in an enterprise context, such as data pipeline systems, we're now actually going to bring from, you might have heard of a network operating system or NOS. Well, a lot of the elements from NOS are actually going to be now included directly into the node. So you're going to be able to set up your data pipelines. You're going to be able to monitor them all the time. For example, did it pull out the data every time, or was there an error? Or, for example, maybe you're triggering some API that you need to pay for, and maybe you overused it, so the API is no longer letting you access it. The node will let you know. You'll basically get a notification about it. You can do something about it. So this is another capability the nodes will get. You will be able to basically set up these integrations, and that means both as a developer, so you can write them, but also if you're not a developer, there will be a relatively easy way to do it. Now, can my grandma do it? I'm not sure, but as somebody who's like a little bit savvy and who knows like what an API is, you'll be able to basically write a sequence of events. Like, for example, sequence could be fetch data from Aura API, create knowledge assets, and then, for example, ask a question to the node, which let's say, question to have a template for, like, how did I sleep last night? The next one could be send me an email. And this would be 4 steps that you would write, not really code, but somewhat right. I wish I could demo this today as well. We also have it built out. But ultimately speaking, this would be possible with any data source. So Oura ring, whatever, like basically your IoT device in your home, weather monitor, whatever comes to mind. You're going to be able to just like point the node to it, and the node will be able to collect the data, much as these, like we mentioned, big tech companies collect it from everywhere. Okay. You'll be able to.
And then one last question for me, which is, I guess we'll stick with this like health data example. It's a pretty simple one, I think, for people to understand. The whole protocol is open source. So I'm assuming the node is open source as well, where if I'm an aspiring entrepreneur, developer, could I then create my own edge node application for like tracking your health progress and make it look shiny and spick and span and whatever, and then like set it up in a way that automatically pulls health data from all of these, whatever, and then give that product out or sell it or whatever the case may be? Like, can people build their own, or developers build public-facing applications using this technology?
Absolutely. It's been designed that way from the start, and it's all open source, so anybody can just take it and build on top of it. And that goes also for the UI you've seen. So you can just like build another tab in the node if you'd like to, or you can create a whole new UI that connects to it, or it's completely open and free to use in that sense. The licenses are also very permissive, so there's no kind of clause that you're not allowed to do so. And basically with that, as long as you're using the DKG, your node is going to allow you to build whatever you want with it, essentially. The question you also made about the health data, perhaps one thing to tie in at the beginning of the discussion, not to forget, the big power here comes from actually not revealing this data without any permission. So it stayed on my machine. I asked it because it's on my computer. But if I were, because I've seen somebody posted about knowledge economy somewhere, basically you're going to allow, it's going to be possible with V8 to create this knowledge, make it accessible from your machine as kind of a knowledge wallet, which was a previous name used for this concept. Knowledge wallet basically becomes the edge node, and the edge node is your repository of knowledge that somebody can access from the outside. So you can let them access it. For example, maybe I let Giga access my Aura data because I know him and because he has the credentials, verifiable credential in the DKG. But maybe for the purposes of an IPO, maybe I anonymize this data and publish it so I can earn some neuro and I can contribute to that pairnet, to the knowledge graph. And this is, for example, the DeSci pairnet would be very interesting. Their focus is neuroscience at the beginning. So it's quite connected with sleep data, for example. So there's many ways you would be able to use your local node.
My mind was blown
with it.
Watching that demonstration and just how cool it is to be able to integrate an LLM, some sort of AI solution with my own personal information, not have the risks. I'm a very privacy-focused person, not have this information about my health, my weight, my eating habits, whatever. Like I'm on a fitness journey, my calorie intake, the amount of exercising I do, calories burned. I don't want that, blasted out all over the internet. And then to be able to pull not only from that private data, but from the public data and mesh it all together is just like, it's so cool. It's so cool.
The other thing is as well, you can think of it from the perspective that this opens up AI's impact potential so much more as well. Because right now we're still so limited in the way how AI is being utilized because it's mostly just super large models and they're very generalized. But with Edge Node, you could have smaller models and you could have targeted models for your fridge, for your TV, for whatever, that will be a very kind of like targeted use case, and it's going to be very privacy preserving way of doing it. And then stitching these things together is going to be, natively enabled. Again, this is like a convergence. It's not just one or the other, but it's actually all of these things coming together.
Mm-hmm. We are a little bit over time, but if you guys still have some time, I want to power through a few of these audience questions. So we got quite a few, so I'm going to combine some of them because several of them are similarly themed. We got a few questions about, well, let me stick with the V8 specific more questions first. Hot to Go wants to know, and again, maybe give me your quick hit answers, unless there's one you feel that is worth going into great detail for. But what is the max throughput we can realistically achieve with V8 over the next 12 months, keeping in mind that OriginTrail is a key part of the GS1 transition to QR codes from barcodes?
That's a very good question. Like I said, we are still measuring. So you've seen part of actually a demo of one of the layers that brings scalability. So this capability of publishing more knowledge assets at once. And on each of the layers, we're getting some throughput improvements. Some preliminary numbers show that we can do quite a lot of knowledge assets in a month. Now, that also depends obviously on the chains, and how many chains we're on. I wouldn't claim anything just yet in terms so I don't overshoot, but I'm very confident it's going to be a very, very high number. So it's going to become pretty easy to create a knowledge asset because there will be enough bandwidth for quite some time. And we're really looking at internet scale here. So internet scale meaning hundreds of terabytes of data per day, things like that. Obviously, how quickly we're going to see it, I'm not sure. But from the perspective of seeing a tick up, a notch of additional knowledge assets coming in for sure. We see already that there's more than V6 can take. So that more is just going to have like much more room to go. And another thing that also comes with knowledge assets V2 is, and now we can go very deep, but I know there's more questions, is there's a way to improve how to create them, not just in a batch, but also it's easier to connect things together. So we expect to see more of them because it makes sense to slice data into more knowledge assets. Let's basically say it like that. So it's going to be pretty easy and pretty non-cost prohibitive to create knowledge assets as we get much more scale and it's no longer a bottleneck. But in terms of how much in the next 12 months, I cannot really say precisely anything, of course, but we're looking at several orders of magnitude for sure of capacity.
So these are the two types of questions that we get. How much scalable, which obviously we've seen like it's a lot. I believe we had the 1 billion knowledge asset in our goals for this year. So this becomes entirely achievable with the multiplication between different scaling measures, with the batching of knowledge assets and the blockchain-related ones, such as asynchronous backing, and the third one, the random sampling. So putting all those scalability measures, these numbers are entirely achievable. So that's one set of questions. Another set of questions is typically related to the cost of publishing, which, as Branimir pointed out, is going to go down significantly. It kind of goes hand in hand, Scalability goes up, the cost goes down in order to achieve the inconsequential nature for publishers, for users of the DKG, which is, the most important goal that we should strive for. So getting DKG into the hands of any user, into any device, and onto any chain. And this is also where the cost savings are highly, highly important.
Mm-hmm. So we got a few questions also about knowledge mining and the incentivization for knowledge mining. So to sort of wrap them all together, could you guys share a little bit about how the incentivization for knowledge mining works, how it will work? And I believe now it's being at least partially subsidized by OriginTrail. There was a fund set aside or some funds, I should say, set aside to incentivize knowledge mining. But what are the plans for knowledge mining, especially with the launch of the paranets in terms of incentivization?
Yeah, so initially the knowledge mining operates and the paranets operate on the principle of basically rewarding usage or creation of knowledge assets, basically. So when you create knowledge assets, and the quant here being pretty much track spent, the initial version of the paranets allows basically paranets to spend incentive funds, the emitted funds in Neuro or any other token in proportion to how many track was spent. So for example, if you spend 2 track per knowledge asset, for example, and the Neuro per track reward is, 5 Neuro per track, you're going to get 10 Neuro as a reward. It's not as simple as that. So there's an additional element because not only the miner gets rewards, it's also the paranet operator, the voters in the IPO. So there's kind of a set of percentages. So it gets split between those in 3 pools. But ultimately speaking, knowledge mining would mean you contribute to the paranet and then this contribution gets rewarded proportionally to the amount of track that was spent. This is going to happen now with cross-chain knowledge mining in such a way that it can be done on any of the supported chains. So for example, you could do this on Base and you'll be able to get Neuro, even though you might have not been using Neuro. And that's what Giga mentioned is one of the cool things here is that it actually attracts more people to NeuroWeb. So we're going to see people who maybe haven't been part of our ecosystem because our DKG is part of other ecosystems, actually get additional motivation to come and do their activities on NeuroWeb, participate in governance, do all of the cool stuff that it enables. So that's roughly on knowledge mining. There's a bit more in the docs you guys can see. And also there will be more technical details on how you can do this, including creating a paranet and so on in the docs already. So you can go check the SDK information. There's examples and feel free to also reach out to the team through Discord. We can also help.
Another question, when is OriginTrail coming to the Bitcoin blockchain? If there's any interest for it, because I know that part of it is based on the demand.
Because there's an RFC, not RFC, is it an RFC open? I think you have to make a pull request on. So come up with a good use case and everything. And but multi-chain is multi-chain, and it was any user, any device, any chain. So I guess at this point, that might be the level of detail. Unless Giga Brana, you have some additional thoughts on this?
Guess not. Okay, so speaking of multi-chain, any update on when NeuroWeb will be supported on the new Polkadot Ledger app?
Yeah, that is finally just around the corner. So the Ledger app is out, I believe, beginning of this week or end of last week. And the coming update on NeuroWeb will enable this support. So there's some tiny tweaks that are needed to enable the app to use NeuroWeb. So expect this coming within the next couple of weeks. Basically, you'll be able to use Ledger natively with NeuroWeb.
So this was an interesting question. Are you guys familiar with the virtual idols? This sort of phenomenon? Brana, you might be. It's just like music related. I might have this wrong, but I believe it's like AI generated, typically female pop stars. And I want to say Japan or Korea. And so they do music, but like their images are all kind of AI generated. I'm sorry if I'm messing this up horribly, but somebody asked if there's any ways the DKG can enhance the virtual idol industry. And more broadly, if you're not familiar with that, then any ways the DKG can help facilitate a successful infrastructure for digital intellectual property management.
I shared a panel in Hong Kong with a lady who was speaking about the social network where you would have human agents as well as AI agents or AI users and human users, all of them being as a part of one ecosystem. And I'm guessing that the virtual idol takes that concept into like the digital performance space. So similar principles, yes, apply around IP. And knowledge assets are a great way to bring transparency, explicability, and in this predictability of how different AI personas can and should act or perform and how they can be enhanced. With that transparency, we minimize the potential for IP to be infringed or for some unwanted activity to take place. That said, I feel it's a big field of potential disruption that the DKG can play a big role in, and with kind of the DKG Edge capabilities, they can bring that even closer to the users and then make it much more interactable in that way. So why not? It can also be a much more powerful way of introducing new business models on top of that, right? Because then you can actually monetize that IP that's being created either by an AI agent or even the AI agent, in this case, the idols themselves. So it's an interesting space. I think there's also one builder within the ecosystem, Canvasland, who are working quite a bit in this IP management space. So maybe check them out as well. They're very much using the DKG to achieve that goal.
So I think I'm going to ask 3 more questions here in the interest of time. So I apologize in advance if I did not have the chance to get to your question. Feel free to submit it again the next time we take questions, or I also have this list of questions and I might incorporate into the next episode. I'm going to ask you, Branimir, I'm assuming you'll answer this question, to try to give a short answer. We'll see how well this works. But somebody asks, I heard that V8 will include vector embedding. Can you share how this improves the information retrieval process in a DRAG pipeline?
Oh, okay. There's a lot of online resources on this, already simplified. Vector embeddings are a way to represent knowledge for LLMs, and they're very useful specifically for RAG because they enable this first retrieval part of RAG, retrieval augmented generation. So what these vectors do is they allow you to do some very clever search. There's different types of search. You can, for example, do a Sparkle query, a database query. That's a form of search. Or you can do like a classic search where it's kind of word-based. So for example, keyword-based. You've probably heard of keyword-based search. For example, Google search used to be like that for a very long time and still employs this, by the way. It's not kind of a deprecated technique. Actually, Google employs all of this: knowledge graph, vectors, keyword search, and other things. So basically, keyword search you can consider kind of like, you type a word like, I don't know, New York, and then the exact same word or words, New York, have to show up in the text. Or for example, cat, the word cat. If somebody spells it differently, for example, if it's cats with an S, and cats is not in the text, but cat is, that search might miss. That could be a miss because it's not a one-to-one match. Or consider kind of a synonym, like you can have, two words pretty much meaning the same thing, like, I don't know, path or road. So if you're searching for path, you won't find with this basic keyword search any occurrences of the word road. Vectors help here because vectors actually create these embeddings of words, which means they move them in something called latent space. And I won't go into more of this sci-fi words, but like basically what that means is the word path and the word road, they're going to be very close in this latent space, close in terms of proximity, while the word, for example, duck is going to be very far because it's not semantically similar. So vector embeddings enable you to organize things according to similarity in this thing called latent space. So when you vectorize some knowledge, you're easily able to find similar knowledge to it because in this new space, it's going to be close. And that goes for words, for sentences, for videos, for whatever. Or knowledge graphs. There's things called knowledge graph embeddings. They're probably the most powerful kind of embeddings, and they're increasingly being used actually in AI. So long story short, knowledge assets, you can create vector embeddings from them. DRAG is built on this. And knowledge assets version 2 are going to get native support. So basically, when you publish knowledge assets, you're going to be able to include your embeddings inside. And therefore, you determine how your knowledge gets perceived by other systems. So roughly, that's, I guess, a short explanation on how they improve DRAG. Maybe some examples of music, for example. When you're Shazamming, probably somebody has Shazammed. Shazam uses these types of things. They don't use words to search, right? They vectorize, in a way, the sound, and they look for similar sound in terms of frequency and things like that. And most of the time, they find the song you're actually Shazamming. Well, think of that, but for anything. Think creating your personal knowledge graph and finding similar people to you based on vectors. Somebody who has similar music interests, somebody who has like whatever movie interest, like, I don't know, kind of a DKG based Tinder or something of that sort. It's possible with embeddings. It's a really, really cool improvement. So it definitely is going to bring quite a bit when we get this natively into the knowledge assets. But even today, you can do it with knowledge assets and build DRAG with vector embeddings.
$1 million app someone can build right there is an app that uses a DKG node on your phone to suck up all of your private data, your pictures, your music, everything about yourself, only keep it locally, but then match you with somebody else whose data is shared or kept locally, and give you like a percentage, a match rate or whatever, and then you get married and you have lovely children.
Exactly.
Lovely children part we haven't figured out yet, but yeah.
Yeah.
That's version 10.
Someone named Giga, I don't know if this is the real Giga or an imposter, asks, when will Trace Labs send Brana to Lex Fridman's podcast asking for a friend?
That's a good question. But he has podcasts there. Like, I can talk, but for 3 hours, okay, it's a little bit too much. So I got to practice a little bit more.
He'll keep talking.
He's good. He's really good. Yeah. Will be great.
We're not giving up Jonathan ever. Not for Lex.
We could do both.
Yeah.
I'll share you with Lex. So, final question that I have for today from someone named Brian, who is asking if there's any updates on the next DKGCon and requesting that it be in a tropical country.
There's an update. It's not yet 100% confirmed, but we're definitely having this year's DKGCon in a little bit more, I guess, logistics-friendly location. Very likely close to Venice, or inside the Venice perimeter. So it's very easy to fly in there. So we're likely going to be doing it with one of our long-standing partners from H Farm. So they are like a huge educational, I guess, facility or institution, which also happened to support us in the past. So likely moving not exactly in the tropical space, but yeah, definitely in a place where it's much, much easier to land and then visit us. So it'd be cool to see more of you visiting the DKGCon. And I'm sure the visitors from last year will join us too. And since I'm talking, I just wanted to make one correction, or I'm not sure if the correction is needed. More so, in addition to what I said earlier about the targets of the 1 billion knowledge assets. So the V8 brings the capacity to scale to 1 billion and above. So the 1 billion can be achieved, and it likely can be achieved in the next year. So as originally targeted in the roadmap. But the capacity to achieve that throughput, of course, is coming with the V8 when the V8 is fully deployed on the mainnet in Q4.
So that's all I have for today. I want to just pass it back to the three of you. If you have any closing words, any last things you want to say. If not, then you can wish everyone farewell.
It's been hot, and I'm really excited for what's coming. And we're likely going to have more demos like this as we move towards the launch. Meanwhile, just stick around, join us in our Telegram, subscribe for all the updates, and make sure to follow, actually to share this discussion from today. I see we have gotten more views than Sky News. We have gotten more views than some of the crypto KOLs, which is very much commendable. Great job, community, for sharing what's happening.
Awesome. Stay on track.
This has been On Track, brought to you by OriginTrail. If you like what you heard, consider giving the show a follow and leaving a 5-star review. You can keep up to date with OriginTrail on Twitter/X at origin_trail. That's ORIGIN_TRAIL. And you can follow me, your host, at MadDopeMadic. That's MADDOPEMADIC. Until next episode, trace on and stay on track.